Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again to the Meat and Potato Show, conservative talk and awesome rock. I am, of course, your host, Christopher Mader, and this is part 5 of the Article 5 video expose that I've been putting together on the Meat and Potato Show. I've interviewed a few different people: Hal Shurtleff, Catherine White, and Jacqueline Peterson from Georgia, who works on convention of the states, and there's a bunch of stuff that I've written already about this for the Worcester Herald newspaper. And there seems to be an interesting political development that's going on in our country right now concerning Article 5 vis-a-vis the Convention of the States. There are many people that feel that amending the Constitution is a good idea to supposedly fix a lot of the problems that are going on with Congress and the balance of power that's going on between the executive, judicial, and the legislative branches. There's also an element of people out there that don't think this is such a great idea simply because of the caliber of individuals that we have running our government today. The biggest argument being that we don't have people of the intellect of John Adams, Washington, Franklin, Jefferson anymore. We have the likes of people like George Soros, Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid. These are the people that will be ultimately making the decisions concerning altering the Constitution. And the biggest fear amongst the detractors that I've spoken to, and I concur with that, that what we did when we rewrote the Articles of Confederation, the idea was to fix what was wrong with the Articles of Confederation. Well, as we all know, in 1787, they ended up crumbling the whole thing up and throwing it into the dustbin, and we have, of course, our U.S. Constitution, and that is the biggest fear. So my guest today is from Boston, Massachusetts. He's an instructor and presenter who covers the Constitution and the history of the Constitution behind it. He gives many seminars. He spoke here a little while ago here at Brad Wyatt's Liberty Clubhouse. He teaches at Camp Constitution, which is run by Hal Shurtleff. Again, Hal Shurtleff was one of the other individuals from the John Birch Society that was here speaking on the Meat and Potato Show about Article 5. And that was a great interview, and thank you again, Hal, for being there. And his recent class that he taught was called Enforcing the Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, from Boston, Massachusetts, welcome Dan Vincent McGonnigle III. Thank you, Dan, for coming on to the show. Good to talk to you. So, the history behind the Article 5. I know that from my information, this is not anything really technically new that's been going on. It's been going on for a while, but it's not, it keeps running into a lot of roadblocks because of some of the things that I had just talked about. There's a lot of people out there that are saying it's not a very good idea right now, considering the caliber of individuals that we have in our Congress. Again, if this was 100 or 150 years ago, it may or may not have been a good idea even then. But it seems the type of individuals that are pushing for this are not exactly looking out for the best interests of the United States. And I just want you to talk a little bit about that, and then we can segue into what you do for your classes. And I know you're going to give us some visuals here, so go ahead.
Well, as far as the proposal to have a Constitutional Convention, or what they call a Convention of the States under Article 5, I believe that the right thing to do is to enforce the existing Constitution rather than amend the document. And the question arises, if the existing document is not being enforced, how then would the new amendments be enforced?
Exactly. And one of the arguments that I kept hearing again and again is that our government doesn't follow the Constitution as it is now. Well, what pie-in-the-sky idea do we think that just because we add a few amendments that they're going to obey that too?
Right. We're very, very far in practical execution today. We're very, very far from the existing document,
right?
And especially it really ramped up in the early 20th century when the Federal Reserve System came in.
Yes. Joining the League of Nations,
right,
as it was called then.
The National Guard came in, and the militia composed of We the People was disbanded. 17th Amendment, which took the power away from the state legislators over the U.S. senators.
Sure.
In
Direct election.
Right. So that a lot of it's ramped up. A lot was passed in Congress in the states over the last century. A majority of it is actually color of law, not actual constitutional law.
Yeah, that's a completely different ball of wax. Constitutional originality, is that what you're kind of somewhat alluding to? It sticks to the original message of the Constitution. I've read a lot of Jefferson, and one of the things that Jefferson, even Madison, George Mason, they were saying, if you're going to make a law or interpret the law, you've always got to return back to the core values of the Constitution. You can't just somehow interpret it and say, well, I think it meant that. You've actually got to really study the literal language in there before you go and make an amendment or before you pass some sort of law.
Right. One of the excuses used is that the document is a living, breathing document, which is subject to change because the living, breathing thing changes.
Sure.
Which it's a document of words, and what you want to do to understand what it means, you want to go back to what the words meant at the time that it was written. So that's the originality that you're talking about. I would consider myself, there's a phrase called strict constructionist.
Yes.
Right. And I think people like Judge Andrew Napolitano, Ron Paul, and others consider themselves to be constitutionalist, strict constructionist, Jeffersonian type.
Sure. Our educational system doesn't, especially today, but even when I was going to school, and probably you even remember that too, there wasn't much emphasis on teaching the Constitution. We did have an American government class, but that was more on the function of government, how bills are set, what the different committees mean, how does the whole process unfold. But there was no actual discussion of this is the Constitution, these were the people that wrote it, and this was the reasons behind it. And I'd like to explore some of the history behind that. When I finished reading Cleo Skouson's book, The 5,000-Year Leap, I knew this in the back of my head, but Skousen actually spelled it out bit by bit. He talked about the 28 principles, and I wonder if this is one of the reasons why the left today doesn't want the Constitution really explored or talked about. It really does have a big basis on Judeo-Christian law. There's a lot of context taken from John Locke. There's a lot of faith and belief in, they did mention God a few times, but they used the word providence and divine providence. And the fact that the United States, because of its uniqueness and the way it started and the troubles that we went through to get to where we were for independence, that there was something bigger and better out there. Now, do you think a lot of that, again, the strict construction is the fact that it does have some Judeo-Christian foundation behind it. Is that one of the reasons you think that the liberals and schools today, most of them run by leftists, they don't want any of that talk? Because it does. It teaches individuality. It makes you responsible. It gives you more power over your life and your own, what your destiny is going to be. Go ahead.
I think what likely is the main purpose behind the way the education system and universities are run is the lack of knowledge that's transferred to the students. I think a purpose is that the powers that be at various levels do not want the people to know, especially the power of the first three words of the Constitution. And the fact that those three words exemplify the superseding supreme authority in American government.
I remember from your seminar, that was an epiphany for me. And I've read the Constitution, I've looked over it, I've done through some of my studies on what was behind it, the reasons behind it. I never thought about that. When you gave your seminar here and you explained that, It was a light that went off in my head. Those first three words, "we the people," it does. It basically spells out that everything that follows this is secondary. Even the federal power, the state power, every other thing that is written in the Constitution becomes secondary, tertiary, and everything else. It's we the people that make the ultimate decisions on what's going to go on here in the United States. That's amazing, unbelievable.
Right.
Now, tell us about why they chose to do this type of thing, and do you think it was purposely planned? When I mentioned earlier about how they came to amend the Articles of Confederation, but they eventually tossed them out. Do you think they already presupposed or already pre-planned that they were going to do this, write an entirely new document? Or was it something that was hashed out over the couple of months that they were there in Philadelphia?
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I haven't read. Madison was one of the only ones that took notes.
Right.
And of course, the whole proceeding was secret at the time.
Sure.
And he took notes. I haven't read his notes on the convention, but what I have read is Balin's 2-volume set, Debates on the Constitution, which are basically the state conventions, the state ratifying conventions after Congress or the convention, the federal convention had ended. Then it went to the states for ratification. I read the debate, Balin's Debates. It's a recent 2-volume set. But I haven't read Madison, so I don't know if there was prior intent to write a whole new document. But I do see that there was a lack of certain powers in the articles that made it harder to execute the war against Britain. The articles were written in 1777, and they were not ratified until 1781, towards the end of the war. So there was really no federal government except for Continental Congress up until 1781, and then 6 years later, 1787, was the federal convention, and ratified 2 years later. But I really don't know if there was prior intent, but I think the job they did was a good job, even though their initial purpose was to just amend the articles. And there may be some tweaks that need to be made to the Constitution, but I don't think anything should be changed until we first get to a point where we're enforcing the existing document in the full, and then at all government levels, local, county, state, federal, and then we determine, okay, let's think about, okay, how can we make it better? Can we repeal the 17th Amendment? Things like that.
Sure. We certainly don't see it. I covered there's a, you know about NDA, the
Sure.
Defense and Authorization Act.
Right.
Sections 1021, 1022,
Sure.
they call for the detention of American citizens. I was down at City Hall for a couple of City Hall meetings concerning this, with resolution brought forward. And it astounded me that the solicitor, Mr. Moore, gave a legal, backing as far as why the city of Worcester doesn't need to be concerned with this. This is a national issue. And he said something about it's being decided in the Supreme Court, and he was completely incorrect on that the Supreme Court had already sent it back to the states and to the people themselves for decisions, which is why this whole organization's been going to the different cities and towns to get it going in the first place. But nobody there at the Worcester City Council had any clue what we were talking about, what this whole thing was about. And of course they voted to just, no, we're gonna table this thing. We're not even gonna discuss it. We're gonna uphold whatever the decision is of the federal government. And I wonder, does this, not only do some of the average students in school have no idea about the history of the Constitution, the importance of the Constitution, we have elected officials out there of that same mentality, don't we?
I don't know. I do know that almost all of elected officials do not follow their oath to support and defend the Constitution. If they did, we'd have a militia of several states in full operation. And any time the laws weren't executed by the president or by state laws weren't probably executed by a governor, the militia could step forth and execute the law the way it's supposed to be. Basically, everything wrong with government could be fixed.
Of course. We talk about nullification. Part of my work that I've been doing on this Article 5.
10th Amendment.
Yeah, there seems to be, rather than, like you said, add more to the Constitution, enforce what's there in the Constitution, and the biggest part is nullification. And we do see that in some of the states that's going on, but again, there doesn't seem to be a big push from all of the states in as far as unity is concerned. It's like Mississippi might say, no, we're going to nullify this law, we're not going to follow Obamacare. But then again, Alabama will say, well, no, we're going to adopt it. So there's not a lot of consistency or unity out there. What do you run into when you give your seminars as far as people addressing the fact of how do we get back our power? How do we gain it back?
As far as what people think?
As far as what people think, what do they do to get hold of their legislators, stay unified on this, work towards enforcing it, and how we can enforce the Constitution as far as our legislators are making laws or maybe even nullifying them, just to get it back into, like the three words say, we the people.
Right. Well, I think the first step would be to study. People need to study the document and understand what it says. And there's JBS has a very good DVD set.
Yes, they do.
And I've seen that at presentations given by Hal Shurtleff. That's number one, because if you want to, in Massachusetts, the state legislators have their own offices, and people can go up there, typically on Tuesday through Thursday, when they're more likely in their office or in the building. People can go up and talk to the legislator or make an appointment, prior appointment, and if you want to communicate, people know something's wrong. They know something's wrong, but they don't know how do we go about correcting what's wrong. Well, first you have to know what's right according to the founding documents of the state constitution, and once you have that, then you can understand what the legislators are doing.
Sure.
For instance, the new Massachusetts gun law or gun bill,
Right.
where the legislature wants to give the police chiefs additional power to restrict long guns and shotguns,
Sure.
home defense items. So if a person really knows their stuff on American history and what constitutional law is, they're in a good position when they talk to their state rep or their state senator. They can go toe to toe and say, this, and this is why you should vote against this bill. And
Rather than speak from passion, you speak from actual facts and historical documentation.
right, you're better off rather than being emotional, which I think is a common trait of the democratic socialist types.
Yeah.
Emotional rather than factual.
Yeah, exactly. You have a book here. I see your name, Volume 1, Dan Vincent McGonnigle III, Execute the Laws to Restore the Public. Want to talk to us about this? What is this you brought with you?
This is a book I threw together. I prepared it so it was available for Camp Constitution 2013. Right. July 2013, it was in print, and I was able to bring it to the camp. And I threw it together really, really fast. Most of it is full of PDF photographs of existing documents. And one of the documents I have here is the New England Confederation of 1643.
Really?
And where it talks about,
Go ahead.
it was a mutual agreement for defense and safety, 4 colonies, Plymouth, Massachusetts Bay, New Haven, and Connecticut. Those 4. The Providence plantations were not part of that particular agreement, but it was for defense and safety. And all able-bodied men were required to participate, actively participate in defense,
Sure.
and also financially contribute according to the population. Population of each colony, based on the male population, the able-bodied male population, it said between 16 and 3 score.
Right.
So between 16 and 60, at that time, 1643. And that was one of the early agreements for what the Constitution calls in the preamble, the common defense.
Right.
The common defense.
And again, getting back to the history, I remember at the seminar, you pointed out document after document where many parts of our Constitution are based on a lot of these earlier compacts and agreements from the colonies, isn't it?
Right, that's correct, that's correct.
It's like they took the best of the best ideas and combined them into one document, which of course is our U.S. Constitution.
They had, the Western political philosophy had developed out of the Enlightenment, 16th, 17th, 18th century. And there were great English philosophers, John Locke, I mentioned Thomas Hobbes.
Yep.
Adam Smith came a little later. He published Wealth of Nations in 1776. But a lot of the words in the Declaration used by Jefferson and the 3-man committee, I think it was Ben Franklin and John Adams were on the 3-man committee writing the Declaration. A lot of the words came right from John Locke's second treatise on civil government. And and that was 1690. John Locke published that in 1690, roughly 80 years earlier, 85 years earlier. And so the English political philosophy, or Western political philosophy, had developed to a very, very advanced stage where they recognized that they were recognizing that instead of the monarch being the supreme, when they moved to America in 1690, they had already been in America 70, 80 years. They were recognizing the authority of the people rather than a monarch.
Because they basically had to set everything up themselves anyway. They didn't have, whereas in England and France, well, if you need something, well, there's Paris, just go to Paris, and that's where Parliament is, and that's where the king is. But yeah, here in the United States, we were quite literally on our own. We had to figure this stuff out ourselves.
Right. The European monarchs were considered the sovereign, and what developed in America was the people was the sovereign, and the first 3 words in the Constitution, we the people, that's the sovereign.
Sure.
In America, that's the sovereign, and that's the Declaration declares the supreme authority of the people, and also in the preamble where it says, we the people, and then you go to the end of the preamble, do ordain and establish this Constitution. So, because they ordained and established it, that therein is the authority, the supreme authority, to create that form of government that the Constitution created.
Why do you think we tend to slip back? Skousen spoke about this, of course, all the founders talked about this, that we always seem to slip back into kings and monarchs and supreme rulers and leaders. Yeah, I mean, we look at somebody like Obama, and he's doing with his executive orders, and people are complaining about it, but nobody's really doing anything about it. There seems to be acceptance of what's going on. And Jefferson spoke about this, about slowly, we always seem to acquiesce when we slide back into monarchical rule or a king's rule,
Right.
and we abandon our principles. Well, if you a republic, if you can keep it, if I can paraphrase it.
Exactly, what Franklin said.
Right.
We created a republic if you can keep it. When he was asked the question, what kind of government have you created?
It requires us to be active.
Well, there's a natural tendency amongst the power elite in the world because of their moral and spiritual status, whatever that may be. There's a natural tendency where they want to control. They want to centralize their control, centralize their power. Washington, D.C., the federal government today is highly centralized. And one example is the Department of Homeland Security. And so that's the people, those in power always tend to want to centralize and get more power and get more control. And but the Constitution has safety valves and deterrence built in. And the title of my book, Execute the Laws, that's another way, because the laws includes this Constitution and the laws made in pursuance thereof.
Right. And that's a very important term, in pursuance thereof. I wonder, so again, like I said, Homeland Security, EPA, their rules and their mandates, they say, oh, it's constitutional, don't worry about it. And it really isn't.
The EPA, yeah,
Right.
they're out of control. Yeah, they're one of the alphabet soup agencies that have gone way over their constitutional
This
authority.
is what I mean about sliding back into monarchy. It's like these people don't care. I've said this on various interviews and different shows I've done, and I've written about it in my blog. I mean, it's got to the point now where they know exactly what they're doing. They know they're completely violating the law, violating the Constitution, but they don't care. And they know that even though some of us care and we complain about it, we're not really in a position to rise up and do something about it. I mean, it's almost like we're powerless at this point.
Well, now in the 21st century, the power elite exert enormous influence through the media, through the public education in the universities, through, as far as books, through the American Historical Association, culture, pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it, you know, what many people go abide by what they are exposed to. And many people, they believe what's in the media, what they're being told, that's the truth. That's the truth.
Exactly.
But there are ways, and by studying what I've done, I've studied particularly the period, the 1760s through to Washington's term as president, through the early 1790s. So that like 30-year period, especially the pre-revolution period, the early 1770s. And in fact, what I found out was that in right after the Boston Tea Party, that was December 16, 1773, the British Parliament, the following spring, 1774, they came down with these, what they call the Intolerable Acts. The Port Act, closed the Port of Boston, and one really bad one was the Massachusetts Government Act. And what ended up happening was there was a big uproar throughout the Massachusetts Bay Province on especially the Massachusetts Government Act. And what the people actually did, and they did it everywhere except downtown Boston, which was under control of the British Army. It was like martial law in Boston in 1774. The people peacefully marched on all the county courthouses individually. You know, and Worcester stood up, and one of the books I have is The First American Revolution, before Lexington and Concord. And that was mostly about the Worcester County people taking over the county courthouse. And they forced the resignation of the royal appointed officials, And what they did, they said, okay, we're writing your resignation, you're gonna sign it, and you're gonna walk publicly out in the street in front of everybody with your hat in hand, and you're gonna recite your resignation. Sometimes they had to recite their resignation twice, what they called with their hat in hand. They fought, and because it was 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 men, peacefully assembled and just took over. By sheer numbers, they just took over the county. It happened in every single county except Suffolk County and Boston.
Really? I didn't know that.
And by the time, by the time of April 1775, when the first battle began in Lexington, that was all on. Nothing outside of Boston was under British control anymore. The people were in total control of everything.
And this on top of just seizing the cannons and seizing the powder, there was...
The powder alarm was September 1774. 20,000 militiamen showed up in case, it ended up being a false alarm.
So it was a culmination of not just what we were doing in early stuff like 75, but because of, like you just said, every county in the state of Massachusetts, except Suffolk County, had thrown everybody in the court out, hadn't they?
Yes.
Wow. I knew about Worcester, but I didn't know every other county.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
And it was beginning to happen throughout all 13 colonies, and Massachusetts was one of those in the lead, and obviously every governor was a British appointed governor at the time of each of the 13 provinces, and what they did after they took over the county courthouses, they had county conventions, and the Suffolk County delegates that were appointed by the towns, because downtown Boston was under British Army control. They met in Dedham and then Milton, or Milton and then Dedham. They started in one house and then moved to another. And there's this what they call the Suffolk Resolves House. And they wrote the famous, Joseph Warren wrote the famous Suffolk Resolves. And that was the Suffolk County Convention. And then Paul Revere delivered the resolves on horseback to Philadelphia to the Continental Congress, which was in session in Philadelphia. The first Continental Congress in September 1774. So they had the county conventions. Then the county conventions elected delegates, and one of their resolves was to form a provincial congress, and they actually did that in October, the next month. And the first meeting of the Massachusetts Provincial Congress was October 5th. Actually, it was a preset meeting. The governor was supposed to show up to swear in all the newly elected the lower house of the state legislators, state representatives. So they went, but the governor had written a letter on September 28th saying he canceled the meeting. He canceled the meeting of the legislature, which, they were newly elected, and then the governor goes and cancels it, Governor Gage. So, but they went on October 5th and met anyway. And then they stayed there for 2 days, and they locked the doors. They had guards, their own guards, and they locked the doors, and they waited till October 7th. Nobody from the governor's office showed up to swear them in. So they passed a resolve to form a new government, the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. And that became the government in the colony, and the two first orders of business, they took over what was commonly called the powers of the purse and the power of the sword. The first thing they did was they resolved to form a committee to study what would be necessary for the defensive safety of the province under those conditions in 1774. Because the British had already gone out to confiscate powder in various areas outside of Boston. And they tried to shut down the town meeting in Salem. The British Army was repelled in doing that, peacefully repelled by sheer numbers. And so they come up with a report when they decided was to form a committee, what they call a committee of safety. That was the end of October. They formed a committee of safety and composed of the typical John Hancock, Samuel Adams,
Who were these men? We always
the elected state representatives
Really?
from the whole province.
And that's why we know them to this day. They weren't necessarily just the right people at the right time, sort of say. They actually were elected, they worked through the system, and
It was a mixture.
but they must have been, well, they were men of means
Right.
and men of influence and business owners and landowners, which is why they got elected as delegates. But yeah, they weren't just happenstance, like, oh, let's just pick this guy. This guy, sometimes celebrities today, it's like, how did this person become famous? How did this person?
They were the main leaders from every county.
Sure.
They represented every county in the province, and they were well liked by the people.
Mhm.
And things that started typically prior to 1774, and when you read the history of Worcester, you see that it was the rich guys that were always getting the government positions. But things started to change, getting away from the Tory royalist and becoming more of an American government representative. And the rich Tories, the rich royalists, were no longer being re-elected to the government positions.
Mhm.
So what you have in going on at the time, you have a mixture. And you see that recent, I don't know if you saw it, there was a recent cable show called Turn. It was about the spy network, George Washington's spy network in New York.
Oh, yes.
After the British had evacuated Boston in 1776, then they went on to New York, went up to Canada, they came back and went to New York City. And that's so the base of that series about the Washington's spy network, the British were encamped in New York and Long Island, so forth. But kind of got off on a little bit of a tangent there.
That's okay.
But
In fact, what I wanted to segue, you wanted to get some stuff going on here. What is it?
yes, some graphical, very, very good graphical representation, which I will use with the kid, the 12 to 18-year-olds.
Right,
And I
and this
think-
is from your class that you teach at Camp Constitution.
Right,
Okay.
right.
All right, great. Yeah, hang on, let's give me a hand with that.
Okay.
Two things. Oh, I can get you. No, I promise. Somewhat live television, we won't make this work. One way or another, we will make this work. Hey,
Maybe I could use a rag.
yeah, I can. Oh, I think I've seen this before. Yeah, I know what you're doing. Yeah.
Federal and state.
Sure, right?
And So that's a basic hierarchy, pyramid of hierarchy.
Right, sure.
So, this is the way it's supposed to be. Now this is I'm gonna show you a different one, like a pie chart, that's gonna go along with this too. This is the way it's supposed to be, and this is the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes,
Sure.
Frederick Bastiat, the founding documents, state constitutions, federal constitution, they are following this hierarchy. And this is what we're supposed to have. But what we actually have is an upside down. In operation in the 21st century, you know, going through the 20th,
Certainly.
a lot of the color law are in the 21st century.
Yeah, get all in there. And now, yeah, and what, you have the laws of nature being the supreme laws of nature over everything else.
God and the laws of nature.
Exactly, and then we the people make the decisions. You have the Constitution, state and federal, and then it is the actual construction of the Constitution, right down here, Constitution.
This is the Constitution here.
Right.
These are the laws here.
That are written into it. Now, one of the triangles that I saw in Skousen's book, and it's similar to this, is the federal government being at the top, but only having the least amount of power. The largest, broad part of power is in the bottom, which is we the people, the towns, the cities, the counties.
Different representation. Yeah, it's a good point. He was using like the area of coverage represented the most.
Right. Yeah, we the people, again, towns.
Right. This is more or less a top-down, the way top-down hierarchy.
The laws of nature, nature's God being supreme over everything else.
Praise from the Declaration of Independence.
That's it, yeah.
So what we have is,
Go ahead, it's not even attached. I want to flip it over. Go ahead.
what we actually have is this. We have this.
Constitutional laws on the top.
And what I call the upside down pyramid, I would say beginning around the early 20th century, the 1913, the passing of the Federal Reserve Act, and the beginning of funny money.
Yes. That's a good line.
I would call
I like
this
that.
matrix. False society or false government.
Sure. I can understand. I like that analogy.
And this would be the blue pill, the blue pill, or the red pill. Which is the good one? The red one's the good one.
Red one's a good one.
Okay, this is the blue pill. That's the blue pill. Blue pill. And
One more time.
go back to the original. This would be the red pill. The way it's supposed to be. Now, the majority of the living movement have not taken the red pill. They've taken what I call the purple pill.
I see what you're saying.
They're partway.
They're almost there, just not quite. Right.
Because what's not being done, the laws aren't being executed according to the Constitution, and the people aren't promoting it. They're not promoting enforcement of the Constitution. They're not promoting regaining their power, their supreme superseding power, which you go according to the, you read the debates by Valen, you read the Federalist Papers, the anti-Federalist Papers, Story's 1833 commentaries on the Constitution, Rawls' commentaries, St. Tucker's commentaries on Blackstone's commentaries, and they all talk about the deterrent to a standing army that may go renegade, or the deterrent to tyranny and usurpation. They use those words.
Right.
Then was we the people. This is the deterrent. And how did they give? They asserted the power. They ordained and established this Constitution. Then they used the existing the existing power structure that was composed of the people, it goes back to the New England Confederation of 1643. What did I say? 16 able-bodied men, 16 to 60, were required for defense and safety of the process.
Right.
And what the in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15, congressional powers. It says the militia to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws. And the militia is composed of who?
I mean, the people.
All the able-bodied. Today it would be men and women.
Right.
Able-bodied, with some exceptions, with a few exceptions. Back in the day, an exempt, like the millman who ran the mill that created the grain.
Sure.
He had an exemption.
Because he had to make mills, he had to feed
the ferryman that ran a ferry across the Charles River.
because he had to transport, right?
He had to always be doing that.
Sure.
He had an exemption. So there were various exemptions to a militia service. But in general, it was all
able-bodied.
between a minimum age and a maximum age. So that the execution of the laws means, like I said before, execute this Constitution and the laws made in pursuance thereof, which is from Article 6, Supremacy Clause. So that's the red pill. But there's practically nobody talking to the state legislators. They don't even want to even use the M word. And when I was down in the Rhode Island State House with some oath keepers, they don't use that word in this building. So it's been demonized, especially since the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995.
Yeah, we have this image of militia being these wacko right-wing.
Right.
Some of them are, understandably, but. And one of the things I learned when I was here with your seminar is that the responsibility of the neighborhoods and the towns to keep a well-regulated militia. It is your responsibility. If you and I lived on the same neighborhood, let's say you and I might be, I don't know, elected by our neighborhood to be commanders. It would be our responsibility, I don't know, the other Saturday or once a month or something like that, to call everybody together.
Less frequent than that. Maybe
Less
two or three times a year.
Really?
Just a
We're going to meet at such and such field. Bring all your guns, bring your stuff. We're going to see how well trained you are.
Maybe four times a year, a local company mustered. The entire county mustered together. Suffolk, Middlesex, Worcester County, the entire county mustered together maybe once or twice, maybe once a year. So
this was enough that was needed. But again, it's a different type of mentality, different type of way that people were living back then, because 9 times out of 10, these people were traipsing around in the woods hunting. They were using their guns all the time. They were most likely defending themselves against Indian attacks. So this constant training in the use of their firearms was ongoing, and we don't have any of that today.
A well-armed society was a polite society.
Yeah. And this was the other thing too. Some people were having an argument with me about, would you promote everybody owning a gun? And I said, yes, I would. Because the crazy person out there would say, it's 10 to 1 that other person has a gun, and I will get killed. And it would keep that crazy person from doing something crazy. Whereas today we live in a society where a crazy person can say, I bet you, if he stood in front of 10 people, he would say, I bet you all 10 of them are unarmed. So I can be crazy. And then he starts firing. And there's nothing we can do. So we flipped that point over. Back here, you're right, everybody was armed. And it was a polite, quiet, understanding society. You and I could be having a conversation. We'd have our flintlocks at our side. One of us would be. We'd have a conversation.
Yeah, actually, when men went to church, they were required to bring their muskets.
God only knows what could happen, right?
In case there was an emergency while everybody was in the same building, they were ready to go.
Excellent. Was there something else you wanted? You wanted to get a pie chart? We can take a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Why don't you take some time? This is really, no, go ahead, take your time. This is really, really interesting. I love the way this is.
I'm going to do a pie chart, which will reflect the same, the past and present, again, but on a different subject. Okay.
Let me me get this up so that we can have a little bit of microphone coverage here. All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
First thing, I'm gonna make a pie. And I'm gonna make a little tiny slice on one side. Little tiny slice right there. Now, what I talked about earlier, exemptions from militia duty. These are the exemptions. Right here. This tiny slice
People exempt, like you said, the fireman, the millman,
represent exemptions.
maybe postal or some other type of government service office. So yeah, very, very small exemptions, right?
And in here, organizing merely means they're part of a local and county command structure
Sure.
that mustered a few times a year. So that was, this is, let's say this is, according to statute, by statute, following the constitutional requirements. Pre-1903.
Okay.
Or pre-1900, let's call it 1900.
1900, right?
Pre-1900. So that's the way the Constitution, the state Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, Perpetual Union.
Again, we the people have the power, the
That's
mass.
us. And it's
We
mostly,
only have it, we're the ones responsible.
it's not, it's a very small percentage of it is actually military power.
Sure.
Because most of it is political power and cultural power, where everybody knows each other, everybody, when we meet each other on the street, I may say, good evening, Captain, you may say, good evening, Lieutenant, because we were all at a rank in our local militia company, and that's the way people might address each other. So that was by statute, and the statutes, as I said, go back to the 1600s.
Common defense, right?
Came all the way up to the Constitution. And so, what I'm going to do is what we have now. Let me show you what we have now.
Right.
I'm going to leave the little sliver right there.
Oh, I think I know what you're gonna do. I think I know what you're gonna do. And it's, yeah, I think I know. Go ahead.
And it's still by statute, but I'm going to say color of law,
Right. The color of law.
meaning unconstitutional. It doesn't necessarily mean a U.S. Supreme Court decision. It just means on its face that you read it, and it's clearly those two sections of the National Defense Authorization Act.
We know
Law-
it's constitutional, but and that's the law.
So by statute,
And let's read the precedent.
okay, so what do we got? We have we the people. Over here, we have the National Guard. Is the little sliver. National Guard is now the little sliver right here. A tiny fraction of the population of able-bodied men and women. We the people
Just bandit.
unorganized. And what they actually did, even though Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16 reads, to provide for organizing, arming, disciplining the militia. The key word is organizing. Provide for organizing the militia. That's a mandate. That's a mandate.
I thought you were actually going to do the opposite, that we the people would be here, and the National Guard and the military would all be here.
We're all here, We're the big
We're
piece.
still a big piece, but we're disbanded and we're unorganized.
All right.
And I was gonna say even poorly educated too. And powerless, right? Well, it's the same thing.
The only power that we have is what Lysander Spooner said is the only power we have according to the Constitution, but he's wrong. He's right, it's the only power that we actually have in practical usage today. He said the only power is the vote.
Yeah.
He wrote a book in 1870 called The Constitution of No Authority. And when I got to the beginning of the book, he had already gone over that, and I knew he was wrong. Because we have the power through execution of the laws.
Sure, exactly. Right.
If the governor is the president, the marshals and sheriffs have power, used to have power to execute the laws. 18th, 19th century, marshals had power to execute the federal law. Sheriffs had power in their county to execute state law. And that was written right into, it's in my book, written into militia acts in the 18th and 19th century. It says, plain as day, marshals and sheriffs shall have the power to execute the laws. But that was 24/7 civilian laws. But in an emergency where the marshals, the governors, or the sheriffs can't handle it, or they don't do it, call forth the militia. You call forth we the people do it, they have the authority. So we have we the people today, disbanded, unorganized, powerless. And the bad thing about it is in the liberty movement, the vast majority of people in the liberty movement believe that there's such a thing as the unorganized militia. This is a phrase from the 1916 NDA, National Defense Act of 1916.
Right.
What happened was the 1903, January 21st, 1903 Act, which is commonly called the Dick Act.
Right.
Well, I don't call it, I call it the Militia Act of January 21st, 1903. It has a phrase in there, the organized militia will be, shall be named the National Guard of the state. The organized militia, that's right here.
Right.
This is 1903.
Yep.
1903. National Guard, they became the organized. The organized. The people are the unorganized. What they did in 1903, the act, they called the people, first they called them the reserve militia. They didn't do it all in one fell swoop. They did it in small increments that is less noticed. Like they do everything today. You know, standard improvisation had been creeping along ever since the early 1900s. So,
The frog in the warm water.
so the unorganized militia is a phrase from the 1916 National Defense Act. Now today, this is codified in the Title 10 United States Code, Section 311. It's a very short section, and it declares the militia people between 18 and 45, and it has the unorganized militia. But, as I said, Clause 16 of the congressional powers provide, this is the mandate, provide for organizing the militia. Provide for organizing. But the 1916 NDA said, okay, the people who are not the National Guard are now the unorganized militia. Now what's the problem? We got Clause 16 saying, provide for organizing. That's a mandate. And prior to the Constitution, all the statutes in the provinces or the states, going back to the New England Confederation and so forth, they were all organized. What they call enlisted. We spell the word when you enlisted in the military back then. When you turned 17 or 18, you were in what they call enlisted. Different spelling. It's the same word. You were enlisted at the minimum age. So the militia captain of every local company, one of his responsibilities was to make sure that everybody who was going to have their birthday, become the minimum age to muster.
Right.
He made sure they showed up, properly armed and recruited, and when they came to muster, they had everything they were supposed to have. So this is today. I know this is a lot of
No,
work.
it's fine. No, I'm following it, sure.
We the people,
Now this is unorganized and powerless.
more or less powerless, except for the vote. And now we have digital machines that can be tampered with. Even that can be messed with. The vote can be messed with. And there's a lot of rumors, and I don't know, I haven't studied that issue, but a lot of people are saying that's been going on. In close elections have been tampered with.
Certainly, they have been.
So that's what we have today. And it's opposite of what we should have.
What we should have. That is so good.
So that's a graphical thing that I thought that the kids, adolescents and teenagers, they could, it would be easier for them to understand the pie charts
Yes.
and the pyramids. And I think many adults that haven't been exposed to this kind of thing, that may be a graphical way that they could visualize it and it would click in their mind.
What's your next class?
There's some people down in the Philadelphia area that they're trying to get me to come down.
Really?
And I've suggested contact the local JBS people, contact the local Oath Keepers people,
Yeah.
in your neck of the woods, and get as many people to coordinate a date. And one of my friends has already volunteered to travel me down there,
Oh, excellent.
back and forth.
I was just going to say, how do you fund this? I know it's easy for you to come out to, like, in my show, the train stations right here, you come out from Boston, spend an afternoon yakking together, but yeah, Philadelphia, you have a friend, but how does, you do a lot of teaching at Camp Constitution.
I donate my time.
Really?
And
this is just something you do out of love, isn't it? And just love your country and
and
love
when
what
I print some books, I just print a box of 15 or 20 books, and there's another friend who it's on an Amazon account, and obviously people can purchase them from me too. But it doesn't require a lot of money. I just put out some funds to web host 3 new websites.
Right.
And so I mentioned before the enforceourconstitution.com, which is mainly a blog where I publish frequent short commentaries, talking about things like this, but in words.
Sure.
I haven't gone to which I in some of these put the graphics in some of these commentaries too. I think it might be valuable. But I've got executethelaws.com to go along with the book and any future publications. And I want to post Dr. Edwin Vieira's books on that website. And the 2 exciting ones are a friend of mine, Walter Reddy from Connecticut. He created committeesofsafety.org back in 2008, 2009. We had these Boston Tea Party events at Faneuil Hall.
Right.
And we had 2008, 2009, 2010. And Dr. Vieira, we had Gia Griffin, Pastor Lear, we had Schiff from New York.
Mm-hmm.
I forget his first name. The money guy, one of the money guys, Schiff.
No, I know the name familiar with the first name.
2008, Rand Paul, before he was a U.S. Senator.
Yeah.
He spoke there. And, at the 2008 December Boston Tea Party event at Faneuil Hall, when Dr. Vieira spoke, that's when everything clicked for me. He talked about the power of the purse, the power of the sword. Walter has...
It was around that time. My next question was, how long have you been doing this? But you just pretty much said that.
I've been studying about 2009.
Right.
And actually, I didn't really get cranking on it until 2010 because I volunteered my time at the State House for 6 months between May and October, fighting what was then called the pandemic bill. It was S-2020, Senate Bill S-2028, the Public Health and Emergency Preparedness Bill. And in late April, it had passed the state Senate unanimous, 36-0. And we got a hold of I got a hold of a copy of the bill, and I read it, and I said, "Wow, this is bad." There was some really bad language in there that had very, very strong coercion. And when in a declared public health emergency, that a health official, assisted by a local police officer, could go knock on people's doors during a public health emergency and demand that a vaccination for whatever the health issue was. Like we're hearing about Ebola.
Yeah.
There's different things.
Yeah, I wonder.
So
yeah, that's something that.
So
I call it a false flag, but go ahead.
So what the bill said was, if you refuse the vaccine, there's $1,000 a day fine, and you get locked up in some unknown location. It said the actual words were other public or private premises, which means nothing. It could be anywhere.
Right.
It could be nowhere.
It could be the park.
It could be
or
never
an empty warehouse.
Never be
somewhere.
seen again.
Right.
So there were many, and it was just this side of actual forced vaccination in any declared public health emergency on the single say-so of the public health official. So we fought that, and had some good friends. There was an organization that had just created recently, the Mass LPA, and they were good at organizing people and getting them up to the State House. I produced an analysis of the bill. My analysis was used as lobby literature, and we had tons and tons of people lobbying the State House for 6 months.
Really?
The House brought a bill to the floor, and they had amended it a couple of times. Then they brought it for a vote to the floor, and then while it was on the floor to a vote, they amended it a bunch more times. So the final version of the House pandemic bill was much, much different from the Senate version. So then what happens all the time, it's very common, two different bills in the two different chambers, it goes into conference committee. One conference committee of 3 senators, 3 reps, and their goal is to come out of conference committee with one bill and then go around both chambers for a second vote with the one bill. So it never came out of committee. Senator Richard T. Moore from Uxbridge, who was the chief sponsor of the bill, he was standing his ground. He wasn't going to change anything in the Senate bill. And we had Senator Bob Hedlund with us, and at least 2 of the reps, I believe, or 3 of the reps, wouldn't budge from the House version. So it just died in committee. So after having passed 36-0 in the Senate, it died in committee. So that was October. So after 2000, then came the December Boston Tea Party 2009. Dr. Vieira spoke again. Had a good dinner in the park after in Quincy Market there afterwards, and with a big crowd. And then I started 2010, I started really getting into the Dr. Vieira stuff, studying the Constitution, and I said, you know what? I'm going to just focus on the power of the sword only. I'm going to focus on the security and enforcement clauses, and what's this, all this militia stuff. We got people call themselves private militia, we got the unorganized militia, what's that? I really get into, so it's only been 4 years, since 2010.
Yeah.
And what I was getting back to with the website, communitysafety.org, Walter Reddy, who had organized the Boston Tea Parties at Faneuil Hall, he's focusing strictly on the power of the purse. He's got a patent pending on a type of constitutional money in small increments of gold or silver, and which he has a way that can be used in circulation.
That's interesting.
And a lot of people they're getting into these debit cards that have gold and silver backed debit cards. That's another new thing.
Really? I didn't know
There's
that.
an alternative currency.
I didn't know any of that.
So-
I'll hit you up in an email. Send me that stuff.
Sure.
That's very interesting.
So Walter, so he gave focus on that. So he said, Dan, I'm going to leave you committeesofsafety.org, but how do you want to run it? And I told him I want it to be I want these committees to be local, grassroots, public official committees, not private, unorganized militia groups, just official committees composed of, you invite the sheriff, you invite the police chief, you invite EMTs to be on the committee, you invite constitutionalists, constitutionalists,
Right.
talk about, okay, if we're in Oklahoma, we want to talk about tornadoes.
Right.
If we're on the East Coast, we want to talk about, okay, how do we prepare for hurricanes, what we do before, during, and after hurricane. Katrina, which was a nightmare, FEMA is centralized.
Right, if we had a local organization in place,
That's what it was supposed to have. The militia of the several states is supposed to be the Homeland Security and also the emergency apparatus.
Right.
And when the Committee of Safety, Massachusetts Provincial Congress, 1774, created the Committee of Safety for the purpose of superintending the defense and safety of the province, they actually became the civilian control over the militia throughout the province, all the local and county militia. So that was your Homeland Security back then, and which we don't have anymore.
No.
We have the National Guard, but the governor. When has any governor called out the National Guard to stop federal tyranny and usurpation?
It's never happened. I mean, even what Perry's doing down in Texas is just to secure the border. He's not, quote unquote, stopping.
Supposedly, the National Guard that's down there won't be able to execute the laws. They won't be able to enforce any law, which is mind-blowing.
What is the point?
They're supposed to be the organized militia.
That's what their job is.
And the Constitution says, call forth the militia to execute the laws, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. And another word for, you look up Webster's 1828, you look up invasions and infringements. Infringements from the Second Amendment is almost the exact meaning of invasion. So an invasion isn't necessarily a military invasion by a foreign country. It could be an invasion into your rights. An invasion on rights is an infringement. So it can be used to stop gun control. There would be no gun control if the Constitution was followed to the letter of the law. There would be no gun control.
It's important, and I'm going back to one of the things you said earlier in the interview about if you're going to sit down with a legislator and argue a case or present a case, it's very important that you know these facts. And sometimes, I've run into situations where I'm trying to explain something to somebody, and I don't have my depth of knowledge on it that you have, but enough to be able to know it, to keep my side of the argument afloat.
Mm-hmm.
But they sometimes treat you like, oh, isn't that cute? Oh, he's referring to that Constitution thing. And it's like, well, it is the way it is today. And I'm talking about a situation. I was in court and I was trying to deal with somebody on the prosecution side. I was trying to say, look, it was a violation here, and there's this clause here in the Constitution, and I was reading the law here. I'm not going to get into the details of it.
Right.
And they were just kind of like looking past me, saying, oh, isn't that cute? Isn't that cute? He's trying to play a lawyer. And then they turned to me and they said, well, the law is what the law is, and you just have to learn to work with it. And I thought to myself, you can't. There are some out there you just can't. You can almost see your words flying past their heads. It's unbelievable.
A lot of it is out of law. A lot of it is not constitutional, but that's what they enforce.
Right.
That's what's being enforced.
And well, we have the mandate. This is our authority, and that's what they do. That's what we imply. Dan, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fantastic.
My pleasure.
Great education on this. I will post everything up here on the Facebook page. I'm going to edit it, give you a copy to use it, do whatever you want.
I'll come back when I get the committees of correspondence.
Sure, exactly. Oh, I definitely. This is something that I'm not going to end after a certain
This is
amount of time.
towards getting back the enforcement of the Constitution. We're going to slowly work towards that, and there's a way to do it based on historical precedent.
Right. And everything that you and Hal are doing, the Camp Constitution, educating the young people about that, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, I know you're going to catch a train, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure, no problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel Vincent McGonnigle III.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. What time is it?
It is a little after 2 o'clock.
Oh, perfect time.
I did hear one of the trains come in, but I think that was the 1:55, the 2 o'clock one.